Rain hammered the glass towers of Manhattan like restless fingers drumming on a coffin. The city was a blur of silver and light taxis hissing through puddles, thunder growling somewhere above the skyline. Inside the penthouse of Hale Tower, the world was quiet, except for the faint ticking of an antique clock and the low murmur of a news anchor reporting chaos that did not touch the clouds. Nathaniel Hale sat alone before the wide glass wall that overlooked the city. His reflection stared back at him, distant and tired, framed by the amber glow of a single lamp. A half-finished glass of whiskey rested on the table beside him. The screen on the wall played muted headlines. Hale Industries under investigation after factory collapse. His company, his empire, his legacy all under question. But what lingered most was not guilt or fear of loss. It was exhaustion, the kind that grows from years of mistrust. He had built walls higher than this tower, invisible ones that no one could climb. The people around him learned to fear his silence more than his words. His late wife once told him he looked like a man, always standing in the rain, even when the sky was clear. That memory haunted him tonight, as thunder rolled across the Hudson and lightning illuminated his face. He stood and poured another drink, trying to drown the image of her voice. Then came a sound that did not belong in his carefully ordered world, a sharp, hesitant knock. He frowned. It was nearly midnight. His staff had gone home hours ago. He crossed the marble floor, the soft echo of his steps swallowed by the rain. The knocking came again, quicker this time. When he opened the door, wind and water burst inside. On the threshold stood a young woman, soaked through, holding a folder, tight against her chest, like it was the last dry thing she owned. Her hair clung to her face. Her breath came in small clouds. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I'm here for the housekeeping position. They told me to come tonight for an interview." Nathaniel stared at her, disbelief flickering into irritation. "At this hour in this storm, I didn't want to lose the chance, sir," she replied. Her accent was faint, her tone careful. "I walked from the station. The buses stopped running." For a moment, he almost closed the door. It would have been easier. But something in her eyes, clear, frightened, determined, held him there. She was shivering water, dripping from her sleeves onto the marble. "You could have called," he said. "My phone died halfway," she whispered, embarrassed. He sighed, stepping aside. "Come in, let's see if you last the night." She hesitated before crossing the threshold, as though afraid the floor was too clean for her shoes. When she finally stepped inside, she kept her gaze low, careful not to meet his eyes. He handed her a towel, still suspicious of the situation. "What's your name, Elena?" she said softly. "Elena Ramirez." "Do you always show up uninvited to strangers' doors during storms, Miss Ramirez?" "No, sir," she answered quickly. "Only when I need to survive." The words hung between them like fog. He studied her face, young, yet worn by something heavier than age. There was sincerity in her tone that unsettled him. He gestured toward the living room. "Sit, I'll get you something hot." When he returned with a mug of coffee, she was standing near the window, watching the city lights tremble under the rain. Her reflection glowed faintly on the glass. She turned when he spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." He paused, surprised she knew his name. "It's on the building," she explained, pointing to the engraved sign outside. He nodded, handing her the cup. Her fingers brushed his briefly. They were cold, smaller than he expected, yet steady. As she sipped steam rising around her face, he noticed a small scar near her wrist, a faint line that looked like an old burn. He did not ask. "Tell me," he said, his tone deliberate, "why housekeeping? I used to be a nurse," she said. "But my brother's sick. I needed a job where I could stay close to him." There was no self-pity in her voice, only quiet honesty. It disarmed him more than tears ever could. Nathaniel leaned back, crossing his arms. "This is a temporary position. No one lasts long here." "I can last," she said simply. Something in her tone made him believe her, though he didn't want to. He studied her again, the simple clothes, the damp braid, the way she tried to hide the tremble in her hands. He realized with discomfort that she was the first person to stand in front of him in years without asking for anything but a chance. Lightning flashed, filling the room with white. For a second, their eyes met in that burst of light, and Nathaniel saw not a maid, not an intruder, but a woman, carrying both fear and strength in equal measure. "Fine," he said finally. "There's a guest room down the hall. You can start in the morning." Elena's shoulders relaxed, her lips parting in silent gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you, sir." He turned away quickly, unwilling to face the warmth those words stirred. "Don't thank me yet. You'll find I'm not an easy man to work for." Her answer was soft but certain. "I've met worse storms." Nathaniel stopped in the doorway, glancing back once as she walked toward the guest room, her wet shoes leaving faint prints on the polished floor. He watched them fade slowly like raindrops drying under heat. Behind him, the news anchor's voice droned on about corruption and negligence, but Nathaniel heard only the echo of her last sentence. "I've met worse storms." He poured another drink, but didn't take a sip. Outside, the thunder softened, and for the first time in years, the sound of rain didn't make him flinch. She was just a maid, or so he thought, until her touch made him feel alive again. Morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of Hale Tower, painting the marble floor in shades of pale gold. The storm had passed, but the city below still glistened, as if reluctant to let go of the night. Nathaniel Hale stood in his kitchen, coffee in hand, staring at the skyline that once made him proud. Success had a strange taste, now bitter, hollow, metallic. He was a man surrounded by glass, and every reflection reminded him that transparency did not mean connection. He could see the world, but he could not touch it. Behind him he heard soft movement. Elena. She had changed into a simple gray uniform that fit her modestly, her hair pulled back in a neat braid. She moved quietly, almost too quietly, arranging the breakfast tray, as though afraid to disturb the air. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said softly. Her voice was warm but careful. "The housekeeper manual said you prefer oatmeal and black coffee." Nathaniel raised a brow. "You read it?" "Twice," she replied. Her eyes met his briefly, then retreated. "I like to be prepared." That answer disarmed him. People around him usually pretended to understand his world. She simply tried to do her job. He nodded and sat at the counter, watching her work. There was precision in her movements, methodical, measured like a nurse in surgery. She wiped, folded, polished, and moved on. He remembered the faint scar on her wrist and wondered what kind of work had left it there. Later in his office, Nathaniel scrolled through an endless list of emails. Reports, accusations, numbers that used to thrill him, now only blurred together. His assistant Daniel knocked gently before entering. "You wanted the updates on the investigation," Daniel said, setting down a file. "It's worse than expected. The media won't drop it." Nathaniel rubbed his temples. "Tell legal to handle it." Daniel hesitated. "There's something else. The new maid, Elena. She's been working since 6. Margaret from maintenance said she already finished the east wing. Nathaniel's brows lifted slightly. All of it? Yes, sir. She didn't take breakfast. Nathaniel turned to the monitor on his desk. The security cameras displayed the quiet halls of his penthouse. He clicked one feed just for a moment to check the staff's progress. There she was on her knees by the window, wiping away the last traces of rainwater from the glass. Sunlight fell across her hair, turning the damp strands into threads of gold. She paused, looked out over the city, and smiled faintly as if she had forgotten she was being watched. Something about that simple, unguarded moment caught him off guard. He had not seen anyone smile like that in this house since his wife. He shut the screen quickly, irritated with himself, but the image stayed. By noon, Elena had cleaned the library, reorganized shelves that had gathered dust for years, and left a note on his desk. The handwriting was small, neat, deliberate. Sir, the ceiling light in the study flickers. I took the liberty of calling for maintenance. Also, I found an old photograph behind the cabinet. I cleaned the frame. I hope that was all right. Nathaniel looked toward the side table. There it was, the photograph of his late wife Claire, her smile frozen in another lifetime. The glass shimmered spotless. His throat tightened. He had not touched that picture in years. He sat down staring at it, unsure whether to feel gratitude or anger. Memories came like the storm's sudden cold, unstoppable. The sound of sirens, the smell of wet asphalt, his own shaking hands trying to dial a number he never reached in time. He forced the image away and pressed his fingers to his eyes. When he looked up again, Elena was at the doorway. I didn't mean to intrude, she said quickly, seeing the photo in his hands. It was covered in dust. You shouldn't touch things that aren't yours, he said sharply, more to himself than her. Her eyes dropped. I'm sorry. She turned to leave. Wait, he said softer this time. It's fine, just be careful. She nodded and stepped back into the hall, her quiet footsteps fading. He stared after her, realizing that the guilt in her eyes had made him feel guiltier than he had in years. That evening, Nathaniel sat alone at the piano in the lounge. He hadn't played since Claire's funeral, but his fingers rested on the keys out of habit. Through the half-open door, he heard faint humming. It was Elena somewhere down the corridor folding linens. Her voice barely a whisper, but hauntingly pure. She wasn't singing a song, just humming the same few notes, slow and steady. Something about the sound felt achingly familiar. It reminded him of a time when music still meant peace. His chest tightened, and before he could stop himself, he pressed a key. One soft note joined her melody almost by accident. The humming stopped instantly. Silence filled the hall. A moment later, her voice returned, this time quieter, uncertain, yet still brave. He played another note matching her tone. The melody found a fragile rhythm between them, invisible yet real. For the first time in 5 years, Nathaniel Hale smiled. Not because he was happy, but because something human had finally crossed the walls he had built. Later that night, he stood by the window again. The storm clouds were gone, replaced by a sky still bruised with gray. Down below, the city lights flickered like the pulse of something alive. He remembered Elena's note, her scar, her smile, and the way her voice lingered after the sound was gone. He poured himself another drink, but did not raise it. Instead, he whispered quietly, "Who are you, Miss Ramirez?" The glass in his hand trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the unsettling feeling that he had begun to care. His distrust built from years of betrayal. began to tremble, not from proof, but from kindness. The forecast that morning warned of a storm moving fast from the Atlantic, one of those sudden tempests that turned the Manhattan skyline into a ghost of glass and rain. Nathaniel stood before the window, watching dark clouds coil over the river. The city was preparing for it. Umbrellas bloomed like black flowers on the streets below. Taxis flashed their lights, sirens echoed somewhere far away. Inside Hale Tower, the air felt charged, expectant, as if the glass itself was holding its breath. He had already told the staff to leave early. It wasn't a request. "No one stays tonight," he said, his tone final. "There's nothing here worth getting caught in a storm for." Elena, standing near the kitchen counter, nodded but didn't move. "You should go too," Nathaniel added without looking at her. "Subway shuts down in 30 minutes. You'll be stranded." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "What about you, sir?" He gave a humorless half smile. "I don't need anyone to look after me." She wanted to argue but didn't. She packed her things quietly, the faint rustle of fabric, barely audible, over the growing wind outside. He watched her reflection in the glass, small, deliberate, graceful, even in silence. When she finally reached the door, lightning cracked across the sky, followed by a boom that rattled the glass panes. She flinched. The sound brought back a flash of another night for him 5 years ago. The storm, the crash, the headlights spinning out of control. He shut his eyes, jaw clenched. When he opened them again, the door was still open, and she was gone. For a few minutes he convinced himself he was relieved. But as the evening darkened, the sound of wind rising around the building unsettled him. The penthouse felt emptier than usual, as if the silence had turned into something alive. He tried to focus on the documents spread across his desk, but his eyes drifted toward the framed photo of his wife. The memory of her laughter had faded into static. Then he noticed something on the chair beside the piano, a familiar shape. His jacket, the one he had left in the study that morning. He frowned. She must have come back. He checked the security system. All other staff had clocked out, but one access log remained active. Elena Ramirez. His chest tightened. What was she doing here? He switched the camera feed for the East Wing, the one that overlooked his private office. The power flickered once, the image cutting to static, then back. There she was, moving through the shadows, her braid damp from rain, carrying a folded blanket in her arms. She crossed to his desk, placing the blanket over the framed photograph of his late wife, the one he had left unprotected near the open window. He froze. The wind outside howled through the narrow cracks of the building, whistling like ghosts through stone, and she, just a maid, stood there, trying to keep the rain from touching the memory of a woman she'd never met. He didn't think. He grabbed his coat and strode down the corridor. When he reached the room, the storm burst open above them. The windows shook violently, droplets breaking. Through a hairline crack in the glass, she turned, startled to see him. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its usual edge. "You should have gone home." "I couldn't," she said over the wind. "You left the window open." The rain was coming in. It was going to ruin her picture. Her words struck him harder than the thunder that followed. For a moment, all he could do was stare at her, the way her wet hair clung to her face, the way her breath trembled, but her hands did not. "You don't even know her," he said quietly. "No," she answered, but someone did. Someone who loved her enough to keep her picture close. I thought she deserved to stay dry. He wanted to speak, to say something sharp enough to reclaim control, but the words wouldn't come. The light flickered, and in that flash, he saw the reflection of both of them in the window. Two figures framed by rain, one haunted, one unafraid. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "I'm sorry," she said, turning to leave. Then the glass cracked. A fine line split across the surface with a sound like breaking ice. He moved instinctively, grabbing her wrist and pulling her back just as a small shard fell. It sliced his hand, a bright streak of red against pale skin. "You're bleeding," she gasped. "It's nothing," he muttered, but his voice faltered as he saw her eyes fill with worry. She tore a strip from her sleeve and wrapped it around his palm, her fingers trembling only slightly. "Hold still." He did not because it hurt, but because he couldn't look away. There was something unreasonably gentle about the way she tied the knot, as if she were afraid to hurt even the air between them. The lights flickered again and went out completely. The only illumination came from the city below, the storm's electric veins pulsing through the skyline. He could hear her breathing in the dark, steady and real. "You should go," he said softly. "It's getting worse." "And leave you here," she replied. "No, sir, you don't even know me." "I don't have to," she said. "The storm doesn't care who we are, Mr. Hale. It just asks if we'll stand in it." He turned to her, stunned by the quiet conviction in her voice. The rain outside hammered harder, but somehow it sounded less violent. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. He realized this wasn't a test of her character, it was a test of his. The last fragments of his mistrust cracked like the window before them. She moved closer, pressing the blanket tighter over the frame. Her hand brushed his for a moment, a brief, unintentional touch that sent a strange warmth through him. He exhaled slowly, the pain in his hand forgotten. "You should have left," he whispered. Maybe she said softly, but sometimes the safest place is beside the storm. He didn't answer. He only watched her as the lightning lit her face again, pale, determined, alive. Outside the city roared beneath the rain. Inside, silence grew between them, not empty, but full of something neither could name. No one had protected her picture in 5 years until a stranger did. The storm raged deep into the night, swallowing the skyline in sheets of silver rain. The city below flickered like a dying heartbeat, lights flashing then fading behind curtains of thunder. Inside, Hale Tower darkness had taken hold. The generator had failed an hour ago, and the only light came from the dim blue hue of the storm outside, and the occasional flash of lightning that split the sky. Nathaniel moved through the penthouse slowly, his footsteps echoing against marble and glass. The wind moaned through the cracks, carrying the sound of something fragile. A soft cry, barely audible. He followed it. The door to the east corridor was half open, and when he pushed it wider, he found Elena crouched beside the window, her hands pressed against the leaking frame, trying to stop the water from spreading across the floor. Her hair was soaked, clinging to her neck, her clothes plastered to her skin. She looked up at him with eyes wide startled. "It's coming through again," she said, her voice shaking. He stepped forward, took the heavy curtain, and pulled it closed. The movement sent a small shard of glass to the floor, and without noticing, he stepped on it. The pain was sharp but quick. She gasped when she saw the blood. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice betrayed him. He tried to move, but she caught his hand, her fingers trembling as she turned his palm upward. The cut was deeper than he realized, blood running down his wrist. She ripped another strip from her sleeve, ignoring his protest. "Sit down," she said, and for the first time her voice carried authority. He obeyed. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the strange calm she brought into the chaos. She knelt before him, her hair falling over her shoulder, her breath unsteady. Lightning illuminated the room, painting her face in white and gold. She took his hand and pressed the cloth to the wound, her movements slow and careful. Her touch was warm, grounding, almost reverent. Nathaniel watched her in silence. Her concentration was absolute. Her lips parted slightly as she tightened the fabric around his palm. "You don't have to," he began, but she cut him off gently. "Please just stay still." The sincerity in her tone made his chest ache. No one had spoken to him like that in years, not with control, not with kindness. "You should have gone home," he murmured. She didn't look up. "And leave you alone in this storm." "No, sir, I've survived worse," he said, his mouth curving into a faint, humorless smile. She tied the knot and finally lifted her gaze. "That's not the point." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, but inside, the silence between them felt louder. Her fingers lingered on his wrist, her thumb brushing the pulse that thudded too fast. She seemed to notice it too. She pulled her hand away quickly, her cheeks flushing, but he caught her wrist before she could stand. He didn't mean to. The reflex came from somewhere deeper than thought. The warmth of her skin shocked him like touching life. After years of marble and steel, her breath caught. "Mr. Hale," she whispered, unsure, half afraid. "Nathaniel," he corrected softly. She froze. He had never told her his first name. The sound of it on his tongue made something fragile shift between them. She hesitated, then said it quietly as if testing its weight. "Nathaniel." The way she said it, gentle, careful, human, was almost unbearable. He loosened his grip, but didn't let go completely. "You don't even know me," he said. "Maybe not," she replied. "But sometimes you don't need to know someone to see they're hurting." The words hit him like a memory. He looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "You think I'm some kind of project, no?" she said softly. "I just think everyone deserves to be seen." Lightning flashed again, and in that instant he saw the reflection of both of them on the glass wall. The billionaire and the maid, the broken and the brave. It looked absurd, and yet perfectly right. "You shouldn't waste your kindness on people who don't deserve it," he said bitterly. "Then maybe kindness is wasted too." "Rarely," she answered. The honesty in her tone disarmed him completely. He exhaled, and for a long moment neither moved. The storm outside was relentless, but it no longer felt hostile. The air between them changed, charged not by fear, but by something alive. Her eyes glistened in the dim light, soft but steady. His pulse quickened again, and she noticed. "You should rest," she said, her voice trembling now for the first time. "You're losing blood." "It's nothing," he said again, but his tone had softened. She stood slowly, brushing her wet hair from her face, and offered him her hand to help him up. He looked at it, that small, delicate hand with a faint burn scar across the wrist, and something deep in him cracked. He took it. When he rose, they stood close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The scent of rain clung to her. For a moment, he forgot the world outside. He forgot his name, his loss, his guilt. There was only her breath, her eyes, her hand in his. Then she stepped back, breaking the spell. "I'll find candles," she murmured, her voice unsteady. She turned away, but he caught her reflection in the glass, her shoulders trembling slightly, not from cold, but from something else neither of them could name. When she disappeared down the hallway, Nathaniel sat back on the couch, his bandaged hand resting on his knee. He stared at the storm outside and realized his heart was beating faster than it had in years. He didn't know if it was fear or longing, but for the first time he didn't want it to stop. Later, when the candles flickered to life and the rain softened to a murmur, he found her asleep on the sofa, her head resting against her folded arms, the faintest smile on her lips. He stood there for a long while, watching her before quietly draping his coat over her shoulders. Her hair brushed against the fabric, and he caught the faint scent of lavender soap, simple, clean, unpretentious. He turned off the last light and whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Elena." The storm outside began to fade, but something inside him had only just begun. Morning broke pale and uncertain, the kind of gray light that hesitated before touching the world. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the puddles that shimmered on the terrace outside Hale Tower. Nathaniel Hale stood at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, staring into the steam as if it might show him something familiar. He had not slept. The memory of Elena's voice, her hands wrapping the cloth around his wound. The quiet way she had whispered his name, it played on repeat, like a song he had never meant to remember. Behind him, the soft rhythm of footsteps drew closer. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said. Her voice was gentle but steady. He turned slightly, noticing how she'd changed into a clean uniform, her hair tied neatly again, though a few loose strands framed her face. The faint bruises under her eyes betrayed that she hadn't slept much either. "How's your hand?" she asked. He glanced at it. The makeshift bandage she'd tied was still there, a reminder of the night he wanted to forget, but couldn't. "Fine," he said. "You did well." Her smile was small, cautious. "I'm glad." They stood in silence for a moment. The sound of the city waking below filled the space between them, distant horns. A train rumbling, the whisper of wind against glass. It felt like the world had moved on, but something inside him hadn't. Later that afternoon, while Elena cleaned the study, Nathaniel found himself standing in the doorway watching her. She was dusting the shelves, her movements slow and deliberate. He noticed her pause at one particular photo frame, then gently lift it, her thumb brushing away a faint layer of dust. It was the picture of Claire, his wife. She looked younger in that photo, radiant, holding a bouquet of white lilies, her eyes full of laughter. Elena's gaze lingered on it longer than expected. "She was beautiful," she said softly. Nathaniel froze. He hadn't heard that voice speak Claire's name in years. "You shouldn't touch that," he said. Sharply, more out of reflex than anger. She turned quickly, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean no," he interrupted, then sighed, rubbing his temple. "Forget it." She lowered her eyes and carefully set the frame back down, perfectly aligned. The silence stretched heavy, but not hostile. He realized his tone had frightened her, and guilt pricked him. "She was," he said quietly, after a pause. "Beautiful, I mean." Elena looked up, surprised. He met her gaze, and for the first time allowed himself to speak the truth he had buried under years of silence. Her name was Claire. "We were married for 4 years. His voice softened, breaking slightly. "She died 5 years ago. Car accident. The night of the big flood, she was pregnant." Elena's breath caught. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once, staring at the window as if the sky could wash the memory away. She called me before it happened, he continued. Said she was scared. I told her to wait. I told her I'd come get her myself, but I was late. Always late. His jaw tightened. By the time I got there, the car was already underwater. The air seemed to grow colder. Elena took a small step closer, her hands clasped together. It wasn't your fault, she said softly. You couldn't have known. Maybe, he said bitterly, but I should have been there. I had one job to protect her. I failed. His voice cracked at the last word, and he looked away, ashamed of the emotion that escaped. For years he had told himself the story without feeling it, but now spoken aloud, it felt like opening a wound that never healed. I stopped going to the cemetery, he said, stopped talking to her, even stopped listening to the rain because it sounded too much like that night. Elena's eyes glistened. She wanted to speak, but hesitated, afraid of saying too much. When she finally found her words, they came softly but firmly. Sometimes staying hurts more than leaving, she said. But it's the only way we heal. You kept her picture. That means you didn't give up on remembering. He looked at her, then really looked, and saw that her eyes carried their own storms. You talk like someone who's lost something too, he said. She didn't answer at first. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Everyone has, she murmured. But loss isn't what destroys us. It's believing we deserved it. Her words struck him with quiet precision. For a moment, all he could do was stare at her, the maid who spoke like a poet. He wondered how many things she had seen to understand pain so clearly. You're wise, he said finally. No, she replied. Just broken in a few different ways. The honesty of that answer undid him. He sat down at the desk, feeling the exhaustion of 5 years settle over him. She stepped forward and, without asking, placed a glass of water beside him. Her fingers brushed his again, a fleeting touch that felt too natural to be accidental. He didn't pull away this time. You should rest, she said. You look like someone who hasn't in years. He almost smiled. And you sound like someone who makes people believe they still can. She blinked, startled by the compliment, then looked down, trying to hide the flush rising in her cheeks. I should finish the library, she said quickly, and turned to leave. But before she could, he spoke. Elena. She stopped in the doorway. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded once, then disappeared down the hall. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, the silence around him somehow softer now. He glanced again at Claire's picture, and for the first time in years didn't feel anger. He felt gratitude that he could remember her without breaking. That night he walked through the penthouse, the faint scent of polish and lavender following him. He passed the piano and paused, running a hand along the keys. It had been silent for years. He pressed one key, and a low note filled the room. He thought of Claire's laughter, then of Elena's voice, and for the first time, the sound didn't hurt. He poured himself a drink, took one sip, and left the rest untouched. In the reflection on the window, he caught sight of himself and barely recognized the man staring back. The lines around his eyes were the same, but something softer lived there now. The next morning, Elena found fresh lilies in a vase beside Claire's photograph. There was no note, but she knew who had placed them there. She smiled quietly, her heart tightening in a way she couldn't explain. For the first time since she'd arrived, the penthouse felt less like a museum of ghosts and more like a home learning to breathe again. She turned toward the window, sunlight warming her face, and whispered, "She must be proud of you, Mr. Hale." Across the hall he paused mid-step, hearing her voice carry faintly through the air. And though she didn't know it, her words stayed with him all day, echoing in a place where only pain had lived before. The next week unfolded like a fragile promise. The rain stopped, the air cleared, and sunlight returned to Manhattan, slicing through the tall glass windows of Hale Tower. Nathaniel's days began to look almost normal again, though he could not explain why normal suddenly felt different. Elena's quiet presence had become part of the rhythm of the house. Every morning he'd hear the faint clink of dishes in the kitchen, the whisper of her footsteps moving across marble floors, the soft hum of a tune she never finished. It should have been ordinary, but it wasn't. It felt like the sound of life, returning to a place long buried. Nathaniel had begun to notice things he'd ignored for years. The scent of freshly polished wood, the warmth of sunlight spilling across the piano, the way silence could feel him peaceful rather than oppressive. He would catch himself glancing toward her when she worked, curious about the thoughts behind her calm expression. She never pried, never lingered too long. She simply did her job with care and left pieces of gentleness scattered in her wake. But peace, as Nathaniel knew too well, never lasted long. It began with a whisper. Lucas, his former assistant, sharp suit, colder heart, had returned to the office after a month-long suspension. The man had served Nathaniel for years, loyal in appearance, resentful underneath. He'd never liked the idea of anyone else earning the boss's trust, especially not someone from outside their world. That afternoon, as Nathaniel reviewed the upcoming investor presentation, Lucas appeared at his door with a thin smile. "The staff speaks highly of your new maid," he said casually. "Quite the diligent one. Word is, she's been spending a lot of time around your private quarters." Nathaniel didn't look up. "Is there a point to this?" "Lucas just thought you should know what people are saying. You know how rumors start. A woman like that working so close to you, well, people talk." His tone was soaked with implication. Nathaniel's gaze lifted cold and sharp. "Do I pay you to gossip?" Lucas smirked. "No, sir, but you pay me to protect your image, and these things can look compromising." That will be all Nathaniel said, voice low, final. But the seed was planted. He could feel it gnawing at the edges of his composure. Later that evening, he had guests, 3 investors, 2 old friends of his late father, and Mrs. Calloway, a woman whose wealth was exceeded only by her appetite for scandal. They gathered in the dining room, wine glasses glinting under the golden chandelier. Elena moved quietly between them, refilling drinks, clearing plates. Her steps were steady, her presence graceful, almost invisible. But invisibility had a way of drawing attention when men with money grew bored. "She's new," Mrs. Calloway observed, her voice laced with curiosity. "Pretty too. You always did have good taste, Nathaniel." He set his glass down, jaw tightening. "She's an employee, nothing more." The older woman laughed softly. "That's what they all say, dear." The table chuckled, except him. He forced a polite smile, but inside something dark twisted. Elena froze briefly, hearing the comment, then continued her work, head bowed. When she set down the wine bottle, her hand trembled slightly. Nathaniel noticed. She left the room quietly, unnoticed by everyone but him. The laughter lingered like smoke. The rest of the evening passed in blurred conversation and hollow toasts. When the last guest left, he found her in the hallway, folding linens in silence. Her eyes were red around the edges, though her expression remained calm. "Elena," he said, stepping closer. "About tonight, you don't need to explain," she interrupted softly. People believe what they want to believe. That doesn't make it right. She nodded, but didn't meet his eyes. It doesn't make it new either. He frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, then spoke her words fragile but firm. Where I worked before at the nursing home, there was a man, a patient. He collapsed one night, and the ambulance was late. I gave him blood from my own arm to keep him alive until they came. The next day, someone said I'd stolen from his drawer. They found a gold cross in my laundry basket. I never saw it before, but no one asked. They just let me go. Nathaniel felt the air shift around them, heavy with something deeper than injustice. She swallowed hard. Since then, when people accuse me, I don't defend myself. I just leave. It's easier than watching their eyes change. His throat tightened. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that not everyone was cruel, but he couldn't. Because he'd believed Lucas's insinuation, even if only for a moment. You didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly. She looked up, then meeting his eyes. Then why did you look at me like you wondered if I had? The words cut sharper than any accusation. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Her gaze softened, not in pity, but in quiet resignation. You don't have to answer. I understand. She folded the last linen and placed it neatly on the shelf. If it helps, I'll be gone by morning. No, he said, his voice rough. She froze. You're not going anywhere. She shook her head. I've caused enough trouble. You haven't, he said, stepping closer. The problem isn't you, Elena. It's me. It's what I've become, someone who doubts good things when he sees them. She stared at him, confused, unsure whether to believe him. Why are you saying this? Because you stayed, he said, when you could have walked away 100 times. And I keep trying to find reasons not to trust you, but the truth is, I already do. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. The silence that followed was different this time, no longer cold, but raw trembling with everything left unsaid. She took a slow breath. People will still talk, she whispered. Let them, he said. They've been talking about me my whole life. For once, I'd rather be misunderstood for something real. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. He wanted to reach for her, but didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "Stay, please." That single word, soft but certain, broke something in her. She nodded, unable to speak. He turned away before she could see the emotion flicker across his face. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, watching rain return in a soft drizzle. Across the reflection, he saw her shadow pass by the hallway light, silent, graceful, steady. And for the first time, he didn't feel the need to hide behind the glass. He had spent years guarding his heart from betrayal, but it was her quiet dignity that finally shattered the walls. She wasn't a threat to his reputation. She was the proof he still had one worth saving. The storm returned without warning. One moment, the city was calm. The next, it was consumed by wind and thunder. Rain lashed the glass walls of Hale Tower, like shards of liquid silver, rattling the windows with relentless fury. Nathaniel stood in the living room, the lights flickering above him, the air heavy with electricity. He had been reviewing building safety protocols after the last incident, but something felt wrong, an instinct crawling beneath his skin. The sky outside glowed faintly orange, unnatural, alive. Then the alarm went off, a shrill, piercing sound that sliced through the penthouse. Fire. Nathaniel froze for half a second, disbelief clouding his mind, until the smell of smoke reached him. He turned toward the kitchen, heart pounding. The flames had started near the stove, small at first, but the wind from a cracked window fanned them fast. The curtains caught, igniting in a rush of orange heat. He shouted her name, Elena. His voice barely carried over the roar of the alarm. She was supposed to be in her quarters. No response. Panic clawed up his throat. He grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and rushed in, coughing, as the smoke thickened. But as he turned the corner, he saw her. Elena was on her knees trying to smother the flames with a wet blanket. Her hair loose and soaked her face, streaked with ash. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice breaking. "Get out! The power's out again." She coughed, covering her mouth. "The system's jammed. I couldn't reach you." She swung the blanket again, the flames hissing in protest. The heat was suffocating the air, burning his lungs. He pulled her back just as part of the ceiling tile cracked and fell, scattering sparks. She stumbled into his chest, trembling. He shoved the extinguisher into her hands. "Stay low," he ordered, then charged toward the flames. He sprayed until the canister ran dry, but the fire was spreading faster, now crawling along the cabinets, reaching greedily for oxygen. The sprinklers remained silent. The system had failed. Elena grabbed a pot of water from the sink and threw it, but it only hissed angrily. "It's not enough," she cried. "We have to leave." He looked around, no clear path. Smoke had already swallowed the main exit. The emergency stairwell was 2 rooms away, beyond a growing wall of fire. He scanned the room, calculating, desperate. "The balcony," he said. "Now." She nodded, her coughing growing worse. He threw open the sliding glass door, the wind slamming against them, rain pouring sideways. They stumbled outside the storm, pelting their faces. Lightning split the sky, revealing the chaos behind them, the penthouse glowing red through the smoke. Elena gasped, clutching her chest. "There's still someone inside," she said, eyes wide. "No," he shouted. "Everyone left hours ago." The maintenance boy, he was fixing the vent system. He never came back down. Nathaniel froze. The words hit like ice. He turned back toward the flames. "Stay here," he said. "No." She screamed, grabbing his arm. "You can't go back in." "I already lost one person to a storm," he said hoarsely. "I'm not losing another." Before she could stop him, he tore free and ran back inside. The heat swallowed him instantly. The air was thick and acrid, each breath a battle. He ducked low, moving through the smoke, calling out for the boy. "Eli, can you hear me?" Faint coughing answered from somewhere near the pantry. He followed the sound, found the young man slumped against the wall, barely conscious. Nathaniel hauled him up, throwing the boy's arm over his shoulder. The path back was blocked, flames devouring the hallway. He turned toward the opposite exit, the glass door to the pool terrace. It was their only chance. He kicked it open. Rain burst through like salvation. He pushed the boy outside just as a beam collapsed behind him. The explosion of heat threw him forward, pain fast slicing across his back. He staggered, gripping the railing. Elena was already there, waiting, drenched eyes wide with terror. She screamed his name and ran to him. "Nathaniel." She caught him before he fell, her hands sliding under his arms, dragging him toward safety. "You shouldn't have come back for me," he rasped, coughing smoke. "You shouldn't have gone back for anyone," she answered fiercely. "You're not the only one who can save people." The boy coughed weakly behind them, alive. Lightning illuminated the scene, the fire raging inside the rain, pouring down her face, streaked with tears and soot. Nathaniel's knees gave out. He collapsed, breathing hard pain, radiating through his ribs. She held him, her arms trembling. "Stay with me," she whispered. Don't close your eyes." He tried to speak, but his throat burned. She pressed her forehead against his, her voice breaking. "You can't die, Nathaniel, not after everything you've survived." He looked at her through the haze, her features blurred by rain and light. For a fleeting second, he saw Claire's face, superimposed over hers, kind fierce alive. "I already lost one woman to the storm," he whispered weakly. "I'm not losing another." She shook her head, tears mingling with rain. "Then don't make me lose you." The fire department arrived minutes later, but it felt like hours. They pulled them back, drenched them in cold water, wrapped them in blankets. The paramedics checked his burns, minor but raw. Elena refused to leave his side. When the flames were finally extinguished, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. Smoke curled into the sky, carrying away the ghosts of what had been. Nathaniel sat on the curb outside the wet concrete cold beneath him. Elena knelt beside him, clutching his uninjured hand. Her fingers were shaking, her face pale, but her eyes, those eyes, were unbroken. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered again. Half anger, half relief. He turned to her, voice rough. "You're wrong." About what, she asked, her voice trembling. About who saved who? She stared at him, confused. "You ran into a burning building," she said. "You could have died." He smiled faintly, wincing from the pain. "I did," he said quietly. "At least the man I was did." He reached up his hand, brushing her cheek, smudging soot against her skin. Your hands, your heart." You woke him up. The world around them was still chaos sirens shouting, flashing red lights, but in that small space, between breaths, there was only them. He held her gaze, and something passed between them that needed no words, gratitude, grief, something like love. She squeezed his hand, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Don't ever test me again." He let out a shaky laugh, the first real one in years. "I won't." As the firefighters worked behind them and the rain washed the last traces of ash from the streets, Nathaniel realized that the fire hadn't destroyed his home. It had burned away everything false, leaving only what was real. The following morning dawned pale and quiet, the kind of morning that didn't dare disturb what had survived the night. Smoke still drifted in thin ribbons from the upper floors of Hale Tower. The air faintly laced with the scent of rain and ashes. Nathaniel sat by the hospital window, his right hand wrapped in fresh gauze, his breath fogging the glass. The city below looked new, washed clean, though he knew that kind of rebirth never came easy. He hadn't spoken much since the fire. Every word felt like dragging through rubble, every thought tangled in guilt and relief. When the door opened, he turned slowly. Elena stepped in, her hair braided loosely, her arm in a sling from a burn on her shoulder. The sight of her made his chest ache in ways he hadn't expected. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes searching his. "They said you can be discharged today," she said softly. "If you want, I can arrange transport back to your apartment." "It's not an apartment anymore," he murmured. "It's smoke and glass." She hesitated. "It can be rebuilt." "Some things shouldn't be," he replied. Silence stretched between them, but not the cold kind, the kind that trembles with everything unspoken. Finally he exhaled. "Sit down." She did carefully, her hands folding in her lap. "Elena," he began, his voice low. "I need to tell you something. The night you first came here, I didn't hire you out of need. I hired you to prove something." She frowned slightly. "Prove what? That kindness doesn't exist," he said. "That people always want something." Her lips parted slightly, her eyes widening. "You tested me." He nodded, shame flickering across his face. I thought if I treated you like everyone else, distant, skeptical, you'd eventually show the same greed I'd seen in others. I watched you. I looked for it. I wanted to confirm what I believed, that decency dies when it's not rewarded. He stopped, his throat tightening. But you didn't prove me right. She looked down, her expression unreadable. So all that time you have every right to hate me, he interrupted quietly. But that night of the storm, when you stayed to protect Claire's photo, something broke. I realized I wasn't testing you anymore. I was testing myself. Yourself, she asked, her voice trembling. To see if I could still feel, he said. To see if there was any part of me that wasn't buried under guilt and loss. And when you touched my hand, I knew there was. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't speak. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. But you deserve the truth. You were never supposed to matter this much. You were supposed to leave like everyone else. But you didn't. You stayed. He let out a shaky breath. And I haven't known what to do with that. She was silent for a long moment. The sound of rain tapping softly on the window filled the space between them. When she finally spoke, her tone was steady but fragile. You think trust is a switch, she said, that people earn it or lose it with one action. But it's not. It's a choice you make again and again, even when it hurts. He swallowed hard. And you still choose to trust. She looked out the window, watching the city blur through the glass. I don't know, she admitted, but I choose not to stop believing. He stared at her, stunned by the quiet courage in those words. You don't test the rain to know if it's real, she said softly. You just stand in it. The line hit him like lightning, simple, poetic, true. He leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. You make it sound so easy. It isn't, she whispered, but it's the only way we survive storms. He turned to look at her again, and in her eyes he saw something that terrified and comforted him all at once. Faith. Not blind, not naive, but deliberate. Earned through pain. You remind me what being alive feels like, he said quietly. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Then don't stop feeling, she replied, even when it hurts. He smiled faintly. That's dangerous advice. So is living, she said, a flicker of warmth in her voice. But you're already doing it again. He looked down at his bandaged hands, then back at her. You should hate me, he said. Maybe I should, she answered. But hate is heavy. I've carried enough of that in my life. You forgive too easily. No, she said. I just refuse to let pain decide who I become. Her strength was quiet, but undeniable, the kind that disarmed him more than anger ever could. He felt something shift inside, a surrender, not of pride, but of fear. You should go, he said softly. You've been through enough because of me. Is that what you really want? She asked. He hesitated. No, he admitted, but it's what would make sense. She stood slowly, walking toward the door, then stopped. Maybe life stopped making sense the moment we started caring, she said. Maybe that's the point. He let out a breathless laugh, part disbelief, part wonder. You think this, us, makes sense? No, she said with a faint smile, but it feels real. He watched her hand hover near the doorknob, then fall back to her side. She turned to face him one last time, her eyes soft but steady. You don't have to rebuild what burned, she said. Sometimes you start over on the ashes. Then she left the door, closing gently behind her. Nathaniel sat in silence, the echo of her words filling the sterile room like music. He looked down at his hand, at the bandage she had wrapped again that morning before she left, and saw her handwriting faintly inked on the edge of the gauze. One small line, "Keep feeling." His throat tightened. He stood pulling the IV from his arm and limped to the window. Outside, the city glistened under the drizzle, alive, imperfect, beautiful. He whispered, "I will." Somewhere below, she was already walking into the rain, her steps slow but sure. And for the first time, Nathaniel didn't watch the storm from behind glass. He wanted to stand in it. 1 month later, Manhattan bloomed under a gentler sun. The storms had passed, and the world seemed to breathe again. Construction cranes dotted the skyline, and the hum of recovery filled the streets. The Hale Industries headquarters stood tall once more, its glass facade reflecting a sky washed clean of gray. But something had changed within those walls, something that had nothing to do with profit or power. Nathaniel Hale walked through the newly rebuilt lobby, dressed in a simple charcoal suit. No tie, his steps slower, more deliberate. He greeted the security guards, the janitors, even the receptionist. A small gesture that once would have been unimaginable. His assistant handed him the morning reports, but he barely looked at them. "Schedule the board meeting for next week," he said. "I'll be out for the rest of the day." "Of course, Mr. Hale. Should I arrange the car?" "No," he said. "I'll drive." The streets felt different when seen through his own windshield. The city was no longer a battlefield of deadlines and losses. It was alive, unpredictable, beautiful in its chaos. He parked near the harbor where the skyline met the water, where the sun painted gold on steel and glass. Waiting by the pier was Elena. She was dressed in a pale blue coat, her hair tied back clipboard in hand, speaking softly with a group of volunteers unloading boxes. The words printed on the side of the truck read Hale Foundation for Disaster Relief. He watched her for a moment before she noticed him, her smile blooming like sunlight, breaking through cloud. "You came," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I said I would," he replied, stepping closer. The air smelled of salt and coffee from the nearby cafe. "I wanted to see how the first supply run was going." "Smoothly, mostly," she said, glancing at her notes. "The volunteers from Jersey just arrived and were sending the medical kits upstate tonight. The shelter in Catskill will open next week." "And you're doing all this," he said, half statement, half admiration. "We're doing this," she corrected gently. "You signed the charter. You gave it a name." He smiled faintly. "I gave it your courage." Her eyes softened. "You gave it purpose." For a moment, they stood side by side, watching the volunteers load the last few crates. The sound of laughter and chatter surrounded them. It felt like life again. "When I started this company," he said quietly, "it was about legacy. My father used to say, 'A man's worth is what he leaves behind.' I thought that meant buildings, patents, money. I never thought it meant people." "Maybe it's both," she said. "The people you help build something bigger than you." "And what about you, Elena?" he asked. "What are you building?" She looked toward the horizon where sunlight shimmered on the river. "A reason to believe that what we survive can become what we offer others." He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. She had a way of turning truth into poetry. They spent the afternoon at the site, walking through the rows of donated supplies, meeting families displaced by the recent storms. Elena crouched beside a little boy, clutching a stuffed bear with one missing ear. "You'll be warm tonight," she said, handing him a blanket. The boy nodded shyly. Nathaniel watched his heart tightening. He had seen her compassion before, but here it was, larger, radiant, fearless. She wasn't healing him anymore. She was healing the world. As they walked back to the truck, he said quietly. You still afraid of storms? She smiled. Not anymore. You not anymore, he echoed. Good, she said, because I think there'll always be another one. He chuckled softly. Then I guess it's a good thing I have someone to stand in it with. She looked up at him, then her eyes bright. For a moment, the noise of the world seemed to fade. Only the river moved glimmering with late afternoon light. Later that evening, they drove north to one of the shelter sites. The countryside stretched wide and green, the air crisp and alive. Volunteers worked under tents, building modular homes for families whose houses had been destroyed. Elena directed them with calm efficiency clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other. Nathaniel watched her from a distance, the way she laughed with the workers, the way her eyes caught the light. He realized he hadn't seen her cry since the fire. Strength had replaced fragility, but her kindness remained untouched. As twilight deepened, he walked to her. You should rest, he said softly. You've been on your feet since morning. You should talk less like a CEO and more like a friend, she teased. I'm learning, he said, smiling. Slowly. She tilted her head. You're doing fine. They walked to the edge of the field where the lights glowed faintly in the mist. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. It's beautiful here, she murmured. Almost feels like the world forgives itself at night. Maybe it does, he said, or maybe it just forgets for a little while. Do you, she asked quietly. Forget I try not to, he said. Forgetting feels like losing twice. I'd rather remember and let it hurt less each time. She studied his face for a long moment, then whispered, You've changed. You're the reason why, he said simply. You make it sound like redemption. Maybe it is. The night wind carried the faint scent of pine and rain. A family walked by with a lantern, their laughter soft and distant. Nathaniel watched them, his chest full of something tender and unfamiliar hope. You know, he said, after a while I used to think happiness was a destination, somewhere you arrive when the pain ends. But now I think it's something smaller like this, watching you hand a blanket to a stranger and realizing that's enough. Elena smiled, eyes glistening in the lamplight. It's enough for me, too. They stood there, the quiet stretching around them until the sound of thunder rolled faintly in the distance. She glanced toward the sky. Looks like rain again. He offered his hand. Then let's walk in it. She hesitated, then took it. The first drops fell cool and soft, dotting their coats. They didn't run. They simply walked side by side through the gentle rain, the light from the tents behind them glowing like a promise. When they reached the truck, he turned to her, his hair damp, his eyes warm. You ever think about what's next? He asked. Every day, she said. And I think about staying, she whispered. Not just here, with you. He exhaled a tremor in his chest. Then maybe this is the new beginning. No, she said, smiling softly. This is the new dawn. The rain deepened, misting their faces, blurring the edges of everything except the way they looked at each other. Somewhere behind them, the foundation's banner fluttered in the wind, a symbol of something larger than both of them. Nathaniel reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. You sure you're not afraid of storms? Not with you, she said. Then I guess we'll be fine, he whispered. And under that gray sky, reborn in gold, as rain fell gently across the field, two souls who had once been broken stood whole again, not because the storm had spared them, but because they had learned to stay through it. A year later, the rain returned to Manhattan. Not as a storm this time, but as a soft cleansing drizzle, that painted the city in silver. The world had moved on, yet for Nathaniel Hale this day carried a different kind of gravity. He stood beneath the awning of the newly built Hale Relief Center, the Foundation's latest project, watching people gather with umbrellas. Side bright banners fluttered with the words, "Opening Ceremony, a shelter for every soul." The scent of wet pavement and coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the low hum of chatter. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered. But Nathaniel wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about a quiet girl who once stood shivering at his door, in the rain, holding nothing but hope. Elena stood a few feet away, her blue coat replaced by a crisp white blouse, and the Foundation's badge pinned neatly over her heart. Her hair was pulled back, but a few soft strands framed her face, glistening with rain. She greeted volunteers, hugged an old woman, laughed with a child. She was radiant, no longer the shy maid, but the heartbeat of something greater. When their eyes met, everything else disappeared. The ceremony began. The mayor spoke. The audience applauded, but Nathaniel barely heard. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped onto the podium, adjusting the microphone with steady hands. The rain outside whispered against the glass walls. A year ago, he began, his voice deep calm. "I stood in this city, believing storms only destroyed, that they took and never gave. But then someone showed me that sometimes a storm doesn't take your life, it gives it back." The crowd quieted their attention, fixed on him. "This building," he continued, gesturing behind him, "isn't just a shelter of bricks and glass. It's a reminder that pain can become purpose, that trust can be rebuilt, that sometimes the people who enter your life quietly can change it louder than thunder ever could." His gaze found Elena in the front row. "The rain used to mean loss to me," he said, his voice softening. "Now it means someone stayed." A hush fell over the room. The applause that followed was warm, sincere, but he hardly noticed it. When the speeches ended, people mingled with champagne and laughter. Nathaniel stepped down from the stage, weaving through the crowd, until he found her near the doorway, looking out at the drizzle beyond the glass. "You were beautiful up there," she said, smiling. "I almost didn't recognize the man who once hid behind glass walls." "That man died," he said gently. "You helped bury him." She laughed softly. "And who's this new one?" "Someone learning to live," he replied, "and to love." Her eyes shimmered, but she stayed quiet, the rain reflecting in her pupils like tiny stars. "Come," he said, offering his hand. "Let's get out of here." They stepped outside, ignoring the umbrella the assistant tried to hand him. The rain was soft, 1,000 whispers on the pavement. He opened his jacket slightly and pulled her close under it. "You'll get wet," she teased, her voice muffled against his chest. "I don't care," he murmured. "It's just water." They walked slowly down the sidewalk, past the streetlights and puddles that mirrored the city like glass. The noise of traffic, the laughter from the ceremony, all faded behind them. "You ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. "Every time it rains," she said. "And you." "Every day," he admitted. "Because that was the night you woke the man I'd buried for years." She looked up at him, the corner of her lips lifting. "He's doing better now." "Because of you," he said. "No," she whispered, "because you let him." They stopped beneath a lamppost, the rainlight turning to gold against their faces. Her hand rested on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "So this is what peace feels like," she said softly. "No," he whispered, his eyes tracing her features. "This is what home feels like. and he kissed her slow, tender, unhurried, as the rain fell around them like a benediction. The world kept moving the city alive with motion, but in that moment time stood still. Somewhere far above, thunder rumbled faintly, not in warning but in applause. When they finally pulled apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything." When it rains again, she murmured, "Don't hide. Go outside. Feel it." "Only if you're with me," he said. She smiled. "Always." They walked on, sharing the same rhythm, the same breath, the same silence filled with meaning. Behind them, the relief center glowed warm against the gray sky, a beacon for the broken and the lost. Its lights reflected on the wet street, like stars scattered across the earth. Nathaniel looked back once more and whispered almost to himself, "Sometimes it's not the storm that tests us, it's the heart that finally chooses to stay." And as the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, two souls who had survived the fire, the flood, and the silence finally found their forever in the simplest truth of all love does not fear the rain. If this story touched you, if somewhere between the rain and the silence you felt something stir inside your chest, then stay with me for just one more moment. Because stories like this are not only about love, they are about remembering what it means to feel alive again. Maybe you've been Nathaniel once, standing behind your own walls pretending the storm outside could never reach you. Maybe you've been Elena, holding everything together with trembling hands, afraid to believe that someone might actually stay. Or maybe right now, you're somewhere between the two, still learning that healing doesn't always come from being strong, but from being seen. When we built this channel, it wasn't just to tell stories of billionaires and maids of power and tenderness colliding. It was to remind people that even the richest hearts can go bankrupt of trust, and even the quietest souls can rebuild an empire of hope with nothing but kindness. Every story we share is a mirror. Sometimes it shows who we are, sometimes who we used to be, and sometimes who we still want to become. And if this one made you breathe slower, if it made you think about the last time you reached for someone in the dark, and they actually reached back then, that's not coincidence. That's connection. The kind we forget about in the rush of modern life. The kind that makes us stop scrolling and whisper, "I've felt that too." So before you go, take a moment. Think of the people who have stood by you when the world didn't make sense. The ones who saw through your anger, your silence, your storms. The ones who didn't leave when you pushed them away. Maybe send them this story tonight, or just tell them you helped me stay, because love doesn't need grand gestures to be real. Sometimes it just needs acknowledgement. Maybe that's why we tell stories like this, to remind ourselves that redemption doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like two people standing in the rain, choosing not to run. Sometimes it's a small act, a touch, a word, a look that redefines a lifetime. If you're still reading, maybe that means your heart needed this story as much as mine did when I wrote it. So let's keep this circle alive. Leave a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in your life when someone stayed for you? Or maybe when you decided to stay for someone else. I read every single one. They remind me that humanity isn't lost, it's just waiting to be noticed again. And if you want more stories that reach into the quiet parts of your soul, the parts that still believe in rain and forgiveness and slow, impossible love, then subscribe to this channel. Not for algorithms, not for numbers, but because this small corner of the internet exists for people like you. people who still believe that tenderness can save us. Hit that like button if this story made you feel something real. Share it with someone who's forgotten what it's like to be loved without conditions. Let's fill this world, even for one night, with proof that compassion still wins, that good people still exist, that we can still find beauty in the ashes. Remember, love isn't loud. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just whispers, "Stay." And if you're still here, maybe that whisper was meant for you. Until the next story, take care of your heart, walk into the rain when it comes, and never be afraid to feel again. Because the storms will pass, but what you choose to hold on to, that's what becomes your forever.